wanted to jump to help you.
It's our Megillah, which is a wonderful Megillah, is not as easy as some others, because some others are much more compressed, right? So you only have 4 pages instead of 8. 8 is much more complicated, flipping it. And so Megillah Esther is called Megillah Esther, but it really has a number of names, right? Some call it the Book of Esther. It's a very common term, the Book of Esther, right? And Esther means hidden. Hester means hidden. Megillah means to reveal. That's what it comes to. So it's revealing the hidden. But the real reason, and it really comes to the essence of the story, and will help you to, we were talking about this earlier, right, is that we often think of Megillah Esther as being a historical document written after the events happened. But it was really much more like the news of the day, like a journal. It's kind of a tell-all story. And it was written as a letter to the Jewish people from Esther and Mordecai. The authors are Esther and Mordecai. And so consequently, unlike a Sefer Torah, which you roll from point to point, you read it like a letter. A letter, you open up its pages and you turn the pages, right? Is how you do it, not like a scroll. So we have to open it up and then read it as a letter, which means it's very complicated. There's an Olympic event, actually, turning Megillahs. And we got I guess, a silver today. We're going to gold tomorrow.
You're going to spend night, practicing. And I don't even know how to help.
No, he didn't have the assistant he should have, I admit. We have a different assistant who wasn't with us.
There is a contradiction. It's still on the roll. So it's supposed to be
exactly, because it's also called a book, right? It's both. It's a book and a letter.
You can have it in a book or a letter. Why you have it in?
Oh, because they didn't write on paper. They weren't writing on pieces of paper. Everything they wrote was still on a cloth, was still on parchment. Right? So it remains on the parchment. But the idea of demonstrating it, reading it, is as though it was a letter. You unroll the whole thing and fold it up like it's pages that you're reading. Right? So what's the difference between a book and a letter? Right? That's a very important thing to understand. Is that as a book, and it plays out in both ways, because it wasn't something that was private. It was something that was going to be made public. If you send a letter to 2 people, it's like on the internet today. If you send a letter to yourself, it becomes public. But the what is it called? The picture when you take a picture of yourself? Selfie, right? Yeah. Okay, it becomes public. So how much more so when you're publishing this? So it was a letter in the sense that it was an intimate document written to the Jewish people by Esther and Mordecai, who were still working in the palace. One was the viceroy, the prime minister, and the other was the empress, the mother of Persia, right? Married to Ahasuerus at the time, father of his child, right? And this was a tell-all inside story. Mother of the child. What did I say? Father? Mother of the child. Mother of Ahasuerus' child. And this was a tell-all story. So it had to be couched in such a way that if you read it as a book, which is a public document that would be put in libraries and be read in many places, that it had to be something that reflected positively on the crown, right? Because otherwise the crown would have you killed. And for those people in the know, for whom it was an intimate letter, right, it had to be, look very carefully at this. Read between the lines and you'll understand what really happened. And Jews for thousands of years have been experts at reading between the lines. It's the only way we survive. It's always been true, right? Humor is a very big part of Jewish life, partially because that's a way of expressing between the lines, right? But this document itself, we've talked about this before, all of us, that this is a document in which God's name is not mentioned. And when we refer to God in the same terms as we refer to the king, which is very flattering to the king. But only the Jews know when they're talking about the king and when they're talking about God. Right? They recognize it. We all have a tradition about this. But much of the Megillah leaves a lot of questions if you just look at the simple level of it. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit more tomorrow night for those who are with us. But even in the just simple reading of it, it's very encoded as a document so that they could make this into a holiday and reveal what the story was, and yet not put themselves at risk because they're still in the palace. These are not underground people. These are the second and third most important person people in the court. So it was a very dicey thing for them to write this book, at the time.
So was the document written within days of?
Yeah, it was published. It was published at the same time the thing ended, right?
And
No, a year later is Hanukkah. This was published at the time.
At the time?
Yeah, they wrote the letter at the time. Yeah, and declared a feast. Right.
Hanukkah
was a feast the following year. Right. Purim was a feast the same day. The next day, right?
Because they did their battle and then they had their feast.
Yeah, right. And also they had, when you read the story, it's not very clear, but if you read it carefully, you see by the wording of it that by the end of the story, it seems that Achashverosh understands that the crown is now, the kingmaker is now Esther and Mordecai. His tune has changed quite a bit from the beginning, where he's saying, I love you, my beautiful wife, do you want half the kingdom?
Right.
At the end he says, whatever you want. It's yours, right? There's no half the kingdom, there's no anything, right? And Esther's requests are, couched in a sort of feminine way, but they are quite bloodthirsty. She says, Moshe Yitzhak mentioned this yesterday, what she says is, let them do tomorrow what they did today. They spent the whole day killing today, right? Their enemies. If it pleases the king, can they continue? And the phrase that they use, the word that's used, he has to come back to tell us. It's a very interesting phrase. Can they go back to their work? That's the root of it, right? As if to say, well, a mechanic, can he go back to fixing the car? Their job at that point, whoever was doing this, was to kill the enemy. Right? It wasn't to go sit in a base medrash and learn Gemara. Go and kill the enemy, and tomorrow, go back to your job and kill the enemy again. Kill more of them, right? And at the end of it, they killed 75,000 of the enemy. The civil war had gone in favor of the Jews, and Achashverosh's relationship with Esther becomes much more cautious. And by the way, he didn't want them to win. It's a very interesting thing if you read this, right? Esther set something up. Some people have heard some of this before, but I'll just mention again, is that when Esther comes to the king and he, dips his scepter to her and shows that he's happy to see her, she's prepared now for 3 days of fasting. She's donned her most beautiful clothes. Everything is at risk, and now she has a chance to ask for anything she wants. I think most of us in that moment would say, I just wanted to tell you genocide is not a good idea, and that's what your prime minister is going to do. So if you want to give me half the kingdom, I don't want it. Just stop the genocide. Right? She didn't say it, right? Because she knows, and it's a thing we don't know, that he wants the Jews to be killed. He is no friend of the Jews. So what she does is she invites him to a banquet. She invites him to a second banquet, right? And now, here's the question. Right? She turns to him, and when he asks the third time, what do you want? And she said, there is one who is out to kill me and my people. It's not accurate. It's a complete fabrication. He's out to kill her people, Haman. He doesn't know she's Jewish. She's made him part of the inner circle. He actually likes the queen, right? But instead, he says to the king, he's out to kill me and my people. Haman is shocked by such a statement. He had nothing against the queen. He likes the queen, actually, right? But she knows if he just says he's out to kill my people, it'll go nowhere. It has to be very personal, right? You want to kill the Jews? I already told Haman, go ahead and do it, right? You're killing my queen? That's what you're doing? No. That's a no-no. You don't attack my queen, right? And for that, Haman is killed. Has nothing to do with the genocide. Now she's exposed. It's the first time that she said, I'm Jewish. Up until now, she's kept it a secret. And there's a very curious element to this, right? His first wife, Vashti, right, is Mother Persia, right? But she's also the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, the great king. And he's from a stable boy. He's nothing, right? And he married her for his own bona fides, that he would be recognized as royal. Right? And she turned out to be a big problem for him because she treated him like dirt. Right? So the next wife he chooses is like a beautiful no frills. She's no brand. She doesn't come from Medea. She doesn't come from Babylon. She doesn't come from Assyria. She has no loyalty, it seems to him, except to the crown. She has no people, right? He asks her a few times. She demurs, right? Now, everything is at risk. And when you see it, it's a very interesting thing because Esther, when she speaks to the king, speaks to him with great dignity until this moment. And you would think it was the one moment she doesn't need dignity, right? He's killed Haman. He's decided to kill Haman, right? Things are going her way. And suddenly she falls on her face and says, please reverse the edict. Please reverse the edict. Why is she falling on her face and crying, right? He's actually taken sides with her because she knows she's become a problem for him. Because now she's like Vashti. She has a people. She has her own royal blood. Is she going to be Mother Persia anymore? Don't know, right? She may have a dual loyalty at this point. And she may have the same problem. And Achashverosh's answer to her is really quite smarmy.
Smarmy?
Quite unpleasant.
What is
and
smarmy?
it's a very strange phrase. It sounds like he's doing a big favor.
Like smirking?
Right?
Yeah.
It sounds like he's doing a big favor. What does he say to her? He says, Esther, I've made Mordecai everything. I've given him Haman's wealth, his castle. I've given him my signet ring. He can write any letter in my name he wants, and nobody can ever retract it, take it back. Sounds pretty good. Nobody can ever take back the word of the king. It's infallible, right? He can write whatever he wants. But hidden in that is a little statement. I wrote a previous letter in my name. That letter was that the Jews will be exterminated on the 14th of Adar. And that letter also can't be taken back.
Yeah, they call it amendment
So
of the letter.
She wants it retracted. Right? She wants it rescinded. She wants it rescinded. And he says about the new letters, and oh, by the way, it has such power that it can never be rescinded or taken back, this letter that Mordecai is going to write. But the message in it is not about Mordecai's letter. It's about the previous letter that he wrote. Right? The one to exterminate the Jews. That letter stands. Right? I'm not taking that back. Now, my sweet little Esther, who I just saved, you take care of it yourself. See what you can do. Right? It's a very kind of interesting moment. And if you're in the provinces, right, if you're in Turkmenistan, right, you got a letter like a few months ago. It said, exterminate the Jews. Now you get a new letter. It says the Jews should defend themselves. You can only conclude that the palace has lost its mind. He's crazy. I want to do the will of the emperor. Do I defend the Jews? Do I exterminate the Jews? What does the emperor really want? It's unclear. You can't get on the phone and call, right? And what happens if you read the rest of the story carefully, you'll see a very, very carefully orchestrated, brilliantly orchestrated propaganda campaign run by Mordecai and Esther. They tell the king, just relax, stay in the palace, we'll take care of it, basically. And it's very carefully organized and planned out that the mayor in Turkmenistan, who's looking at these two letters, trying to figure out what's going on, right, gets a message that the king strongly supports the Jews. And when you read it, you'll see it's all set up to give this impression, although the king doesn't support the Jews, and he's just staying quietly in his palace, right? Doesn't imagine what Mordecai and Esther, clever Jews, are up to, right? And so the first thing Mordecai does is he has hanging over his head in 2 weeks, right? They're going to kill all the Jews. What does he do? He dresses up in techelis, gets on a beautiful horse, right? wearing the king's crown. Now this sounds like what happened with Haman. It's completely different. And he marches through Shushan, and people are cheering and yelling and screaming. They're having a party. They're having a feast. This should all have happened after the victory, not when there's a knife at your throat. But he did it specifically because there was a knife at his throat, because he wanted in the provinces the word to get out that he's being treated, as a surrogate king. And in case you're wondering which letter to pay attention to, that's a hint. And there are many other things that he does, at that point. It's a fascinating process, but it's all a propaganda war, which eventually he wins. Did we have enough wine?
There's also at the beginning that first letter that goes out that says that every man should rule in his own home and speak the language of his own people.
Right.
Right.
That's the Vashti letter.
Right.
Right.
And then, but if, I don't know, maybe part of the campaign, you could read that, well, the Jews will rule their own home, and, maybe the different groups will be ruling in their own home, in their own language.
Yeah, because when letter is written, the scribe sit down and read the amendment, second letter, it actually describes the same way. That in everybody's language,
Right.
it's very similar.
Yeah. And of course, that was the whole argument for Haman's argument for killing Vashti. That's one of the great ironies of it, is that Haman is responsible for the fact Esther became queen. The Megillah is full of these things, right? Is that what turns on Haman, right? It turns out he was responsible for the death of Vashti. He was the one who recommended Memucan. Okay, listen, you have to understand that if she doesn't obey you, right, no woman will obey her husband in the whole of Persia. That the queen can disobey you. You got to do something about this. Now you have to understand there's a backstory to this. Who's he married to? Right? Haman has a lot in common with Achashverosh. He was a barber before he became prime minister. That was his way, made a living. And he married one of the smartest women in all of Persia, Zeresh. She was Persian. He was a foreigner. He was an Amaleki, right? She was Persian, right? And and she gave him about as much respect as Vashti gave to Achashverosh. So when he says to Achashverosh, listen, if you don't do something about this, no woman will ever show respect to her husband in her home. He's actually telling a very personal story.
Yeah, and he wants in Persia that his Persian wife should speak Amalekite?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because everybody has to speak the language of the husband.
We here speak English, not Russian, obviously.
That's right. Get that straight.
You can speak Russian.
To who?
To your mom. To the Queen Mother.
Yeah, and it's a personal story too, because it's a letter.
There's an end story which is worth mentioning, so that you know it, is that at the time of the reign, at the time of the story already, right, Darius II has been born. Right, he is the child of Esther.
He's already born?
Yeah.
This is just realize that when she goes to him, to Ahasuerus, she actually risking leaving her child. Her
But she
Jewish
also has
child mother.
But she also has additional she has
will kill
additional
her.
leverage. She's the mother of the crown prince. Right. You know, he's given her a prince.
I missed the point
right?
a little bit.
David said that the Darius was already born.
At the time of the story, he was 2 years old.
How do we know?
I'll show it to you later. He was 2 years old.
Sure.
He lived. Achashverosh lived 4 years after the story.
Oh, okay.
Right. Her son was 6 years old when he became the emperor. Right.
Darius the second.
Jewish emperor of Persia, Darius, the son of Esther. And you can imagine a 6-year-old emperor doesn't have that much authority.
Right.
But the queen mom has a lot of authority. Right. And Uncle Mordecai, right? So she ruled as the empress, I think, for another 14 years. And then she might have passed away at that point. But she's the one who paid for the Jews to go home and start to rebuild the temple. It's in his name. Right?
Yeah,
But she was really the one behind it.
When
She told her boy what to do.
No, when Babylonian exile was ended.
What?
When you're talking about the Babylonian exile was ended, and they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem.
Well, they began building under Cyrus, right? And then under Ahasuerus they were stopped, right? Because Haman sent reports from Jerusalem that the Jews want to rebuild the walls, and if they rebuild the walls, they're going to break away from the empire, and they're planning a rebellion, right? There was a lot of reason to believe this could be true, because they were very stubborn people, and they were very fierce people. But it wasn't true at the time. So Haman came to make the case in the court, and Mordecai came to make the Jewish case, right? But it didn't work, and Ahasuerus stopped the rebuilding of the temple. Right? Now, he had a lot of influence to do it, because who had destroyed the temple? His wife's grandfather, right? Vashti's grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed the temple. She had no interest in seeing the Jews rebuild, right? But once Ahasuerus was dead, and Vashti was dead, and Haman was dead, now it's a 6-year-old Darius with Esther as the queen mom. Things moved ahead at that point, and the Jews were able to return to, a small number did actually, a very small number.
I think like 40,000.
Yeah, return to Israel, and to, under Nehemiah and Ezra, to rebuild the temple. With money from the Persian Empire to do it.
And Cyrus was in what?
Cyrus was earlier.
Oh, he was.
Cyrus was before Ahasuerus.
So he was the one who allowed.
He started it. In fact, there's a very famous. I'll conclude with this because people may have parties to go to and whatever. But after Harry Truman left office, Harry Truman was president after Roosevelt, and he was the president who oversaw the American support for the creation of the State of Israel. It was during his presidency that it happened. And he was at not a UJA dinner, but it was a Jewish organization dinner in New York that he was invited to after his presidency had ended. And I think it was Chaim Weizmann made a speech thanking the former president for his support in this thing. And Truman stood up and said, "I'm Cyrus. What else would I do? I am Cyrus." That he was a very interesting president, because he was not somebody who went to university, but he was a tremendously well-read man. He knew 2 books by heart, right, which was the Old and New Testament, as he called it. He's a deeply religious man, and the Constitution of the United States. Right? He knew both of them by heart, and he knew that it was Cyrus who had begun to encourage the Jews to go and rebuild. And so he had a sense that he had been chosen almost prophetically for this role, to be the American president who would support the new state of Israel. Right? And so when asked about it, he said, "I'm Cyrus." What else? Right? Which is an interesting, there hasn't been a president like him in a long time.
His partner, his half partner.
Well, that's right. Actually, Harry Jacobs, I think Harry Jacobs, something Jacobs.
I forget the name.
Right, was at the dinner. Was at that dinner. Yeah. I think he might have introduced him, not Chaim Weizmann. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
David, thank you for a very interesting input.
You can hear it again tomorrow.
Thank you very much.